My daughter-in-law threw my drink on the floor and shouted, "You old hag, get out of our lives," right in front of our whole family. On Monday, I handed her a letter that shocked everyone. The sound of glass shattering against the hardwood floor seemed to freeze time itself. Droplets of my iced tea splashed onto my cream-colored pants, but I barely noticed. All I could focus on was Rebecca's face, contorted with rage, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at my chest. 70 years on this earth, and I've never been spoken to like that, I thought, my hands trembling in my lap. My son David sat beside his wife, his eyes downcast, studying the tablecloth as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He wouldn't look at me. My grandchildren, Emma, 12, and Jason, 9, stared wide-eyed from the other end of the table, their young faces registering a confusion that broke my heart. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. "Mom," David finally mumbled, still not meeting my eyes. "Maybe it's best if you go home for now." The Sunday family lunch I had looked forward to all week, the same gathering we'd had for 15 years since David and Rebecca married, had imploded in minutes. All because I'd brought handmade quilts for the children, something I'd spent months working on. "I told you last time not to bring gifts without asking me first," Rebecca had hissed when I presented them. "You're always trying to buy their affection, trying to undermine me." I had started to explain that they weren't store-bought, that I'd made them myself when she knocked the glass from my hand. Now, gathering what dignity I could muster, I slowly rose from my chair. My arthritis made my knees creak in protest, but I straightened my back. I wouldn't let them see me hunch over in defeat. "I'll get my purse," I said quietly. As I walked to the entryway, I heard Emma's small voice behind me. "But Grandma just made us blankets." "Quiet, Emma," Rebecca snapped. I collected my purse and cardigan from the hallway hook. Family photos lined the wall. David and Rebecca's wedding, the children's school portraits, family vacations. In every one, I stood slightly to the side, always included but somehow separate. When had that started? When had I become an outsider in my son's life? At the door, I turned back. "I love you all," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll always love you." No one responded. David half raised his hand in a weak wave, his eyes finally meeting mine for just a moment before darting away again. The shame I saw there hurt worse than Rebecca's rage. The drive home to my small bungalow felt endless. Memories flooded my mind. Holding newborn David in my arms after 36 hours of labor, teaching him to ride a bike, helping him move into his college dorm, standing beside him at his wedding as he beamed at Rebecca. I had been there for everything, sacrificed everything. After Frank died 12 years ago, David had been my anchor, but slowly, imperceptibly, he had drifted away. Or rather, he had been pulled away. When I reached home, I didn't cry. Instead, I made tea, sat at my kitchen table, and began to think. Really think, for the first time in years, about what had happened to my family. It hadn't always been this way with Rebecca. When she and David first married, she had seemed eager to be part of our family. She called me Mom, asked for recipes, invited me over often. But things changed after Emma was born. Suddenly, my suggestions about childcare were outdated and intrusive. My offers to babysit were accepted only in emergencies. Then came the comments about my house being too cluttered for the children to visit, the canceled plans at the last minute, the way Rebecca would check her watch pointedly when I spoke at family gatherings. 2 years ago, when David and Rebecca were struggling to make a down payment on their new house, I had offered my retirement savings nearly $45,000. They had accepted without hesitation. David had promised to draw up papers for repayment, but when I mentioned it months later, Rebecca had snapped, "Family doesn't keep score." Except she did keep score, didn't she? Every perceived slight, every imagined competition for her children's affection, every moment I existed as David's mother rather than just a convenient babysitter or ATM. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced my small home, touching the familiar objects that told the story of my life. Frank's reading glasses still on the nightstand, David's childhood art projects I'd framed, photos of my grandchildren. This was who I was: a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I had poured my heart and soul into these roles. But who was I beyond that? Who was Martha Wilson without the roles that had defined her? The question haunted me as dawn broke. I made coffee and sat at my small desk in the corner of the living room. I pulled out a sheet of stationery, the good kind, cream-colored with my monogram that my sister had given me for Christmas years ago. I began to write, hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty. Dear Rebecca, yesterday was difficult for all of us. I've spent the night thinking about our relationship and how we reached this point. The words flowed as I wrote about my love for David and the grandchildren, my respect for her role as their mother, but also my own need for dignity and respect. I wrote about boundaries, hers and mine. I wrote about my decision to step back temporarily, to give us all space to reflect. And I wrote about my decision to reclaim my own life, the parts of me that existed before and beyond being a mother and grandmother. By Monday morning, I had rewritten the letter 3 times. The final version was 4 pages long, respectful but firm, loving but clear. This would change everything, I knew. But things had to change. I dressed carefully in a blue dress I'd always received compliments on, applied a touch of lipstick, and drove to their house, timing my arrival for when David would be at work and the children at school. Rebecca opened, the door in yoga pants and a tank top, surprise flickering across her face. Martha, she said flatly. David's not home. I know, I replied, my voice calmer than I expected. I came to speak with you. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion, but she stepped aside to let me in. I sat at the kitchen island, placing the sealed envelope between us. What's this? She asked, not touching it. It's a letter I've written to you, I said. About yesterday, and about many days before that. Rebecca's expression hardened. If you've come to apologize, I haven't, I interrupted gently. I've come to give you this letter and to tell you that things are going to be different from now on. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. This wasn't the meek, accommodating mother-in-law she was used to. I'd like you to read it, I continued, sliding the envelope toward her. Not now, but when you have time to really consider what I've written. I stood up then, smoothing my dress. I love my son and my grandchildren more than anything in this world. But I also love myself, Rebecca. And I deserve better than what happened yesterday. As I walked to the door, I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I was writing my own story. Rebecca's voice stopped me at the door. You think a letter will change anything? Her tone was bitter, defensive. I turned back with a small smile. I think it already has. The look of confusion on her face as I walked out would stay with me for days. She had expected tears, pleading, or angry accusations, the usual weapons in her arsenal of family conflict. Instead, she got something she never anticipated, my quiet, dignified strength, and that, I knew, would shake her more than any confrontation ever could. 4 days of silence followed my letter. No calls from David, no texts from the grandchildren. Each time the mail carrier approached, I found myself hoping for a response, then scolding myself for such foolishness. Rebecca wouldn't write back. Thursday. Morning, I sat with tea gone cold, staring at the refrigerator magnets Emma and Jason had made for me over the years. Handprints in clay, popsicle stick frames, beaded creations spelling Grandma, each one a memory now tinged with heartache. Where did it all go wrong? I whispered to my empty kitchen. The memories flooded back. The first time I met Rebecca, David, beaming at Rossetti's Italian restaurant, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Mom, this is the one, he'd said, and I'd embraced her like a daughter. The wedding had been beautiful, though I'd felt out of place among the designer dresses and champagne toasts. Rebecca's parents, wealthy business owners from Connecticut, had spared no expense. She makes him happy, I'd told Frank as we danced. That's all that matters. For a while, it seemed true. Sunday dinners became our tradition. Rebecca would call, Martha, we're looking forward to your pot roast. Or, can you bring that apple pie the kids love? We exchanged recipes. She asked for gardening advice. Once she even confided about her difficult relationship with her own mother. Everything changed when Emma was born. I'd rushed to the hospital with flowers and a handmade baby blanket, only to find Rebecca's mother already there, holding the newborn and cooing about how she looked just like our side of the family. You didn't need to come so quickly, Mom, David had said, kissing my cheek absently. We've got everything under control. Then came the subtle exclusions, holidays suddenly spent at grandmother Eleanor's estate. My offers to babysit met with, "Oh, Eleanor has already arranged for her nanny to help." When Jason was born 3 years later, I wasn't called until the day after his birth. "We wanted some private time," David explained when I arrived to find the room filled with Rebecca's friends and family. There were good times too. Weekend visits, reading stories to Emma, teaching Jason to bake cookies, family vacations at the lake. But even in those moments, Rebecca established her control. "One cookie is enough, Martha. That book is too scary. We prefer they don't swim after eating." Small corrections, constant reminders that I was secondary. My gaze fell on David's college graduation photo. Frank and I stood beside him, our faces lit with pride. Frank had worked 2 jobs to put David through school. I'd taken night shifts at the hospital, coming home with aching feet but a full heart. Frank would have known what to do now. "Just love them, Marty," he'd say. "The rest will sort itself out." But it hadn't sorted itself out. And now Frank was gone. I called my sister Judith, my voice breaking as I told her about Sunday's disaster and the letter I'd delivered. "Well, it's about damn time," Judith declared when I finished. "What? Martha? You've let that woman walk all over you for 15 years. Frank would be proud you finally stood up for yourself. But what if I lose David? The grandchildren? You're not pushing anyone away," Judith said firmly. "You've been pushed and pushed. All you've done is say, enough." Later that day, my phone rang. David's name on the caller ID. "Mom." His tone was strained. "Rebecca showed me your letter. She's pretty upset." "I meant every word, David." He sighed heavily. "Look, I know Sunday was bad. But you know how she gets when she's stressed. The kids' activities, her charity work. She's under a lot of pressure." The familiar excuses. How many times had David justified his wife's behavior? "That doesn't make it acceptable," I said quietly. "Mom, please, can't you just apologize so we can move past this? For the kids' sake?" "No, David, I won't apologize. For expecting basic respect." Silence stretched between us. "I don't understand why you're making this so difficult," he finally said, frustration edging his voice. "Do you remember your 10th birthday?" I asked suddenly. "What? What does that have to do with? Your father and I couldn't afford the bicycle you wanted. Do you remember what we gave you instead? A baseball glove? And baseball lessons. Your father worked overtime for 6 weeks to pay for them. Every Saturday morning he took you to practice, even though he was exhausted." "Mom, we've always put you first, David. Always. But that doesn't mean we deserve to be treated like we don't matter." Another long silence. "I know, Mom. It's just complicated." "Love shouldn't be this complicated, sweetheart." After we hung up, I sat for a long time. He hadn't defended me on Sunday. He hadn't stood up to Rebecca about the letter. He was still trying to smooth things over, to push everything back to the way it had been. But I couldn't go back. The moment Rebecca's rage had erupted, something in me had broken free, like a ship cutting its moorings, painful but necessary for the journey ahead. That night, I dreamed of Frank. We were young again, dancing in our first apartment. "You've got this, Marty," Dream Frank whispered. "You always were the strong one." I woke with tears on my cheeks but resolve in my heart. The next morning I called Judith again. "I need advice," I said, "and maybe a place to stay for a while." "You're always welcome here," she replied instantly. "I think I need to rediscover who Martha Wilson is. Before I was David's mother. Before I was Frank's wife. Just me." "Well," Judith said after a moment, "it's about time you remembered that woman. I always liked her." As I packed a small suitcase, I spotted the handmade quilts I'd brought home after Sunday's disaster. I folded them carefully, placing them in a shipping box with a note. "Made with love for Emma and Jason. These are gifts from grandmother to grandchildren. No strings attached, no permission needed." I addressed the package to my grandchildren directly, then placed it by the door for tomorrow's mail. Something had ended on Sunday when that glass shattered. But something else had begun when I'd handed Rebecca my letter. Something uncertain and frightening, but also exhilarating. At 70, I was finally reclaiming my own story. Judith lived in a small Victorian house in Wilmington, Delaware. her garden bursting with color even in early autumn. When I pulled into her driveway after the 6-hour drive, she was waiting on the porch, arms crossed against the chill. "You look exhausted," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I am," I admitted, my voice muffled against her shoulder. Inside, Judith's home was exactly as I remembered. Books stacked on every surface, colorful throw pillows, and the lingering scent of the cinnamon tea she always drank. After Frank died, I'd spent 2 weeks here, letting Judith shepherd me through the worst of my grief. Now I was back, grieving a different kind of loss. "I made up the guest room," she said, carrying my suitcase upstairs. "Though I use it as my office now, so excuse the mess." That evening, over bowls of homemade soup, I told Judith everything. Not just Sunday's humiliation, but the years of small dismissals and growing isolation. "You should have told me how bad it was," Judith said, refilling my wine glass. "I thought I was overreacting," I sighed. Rebecca kept saying I was too sensitive, too clingy. David would tell me to give them space. After a while, I started to believe maybe they were right. Judith's eyes flashed. "That's how it works, Martha. They make you doubt yourself until you think their cruelty is your fault." "David wasn't always like this," I said, the wine loosening my tongue. "He was such a thoughtful boy. Remember how he'd pick wildflowers for me when he was little? Or the Mother's Day cards he made?" "People change," Judith said gently. "Sometimes they become who they truly are. Sometimes they become who they think they need to be." That night, I slept better than I had in months, wrapped in Judith's guest quilt, surrounded by her files and books. For the first time since Sunday, I wasn't alone with my thoughts. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices downstairs. In the kitchen, I found Judith chatting with a woman about my age, both of them laughing over steaming mugs. "Martha, this is Eleanor," Judith said. "My neighbor and the therapist I told you about." Eleanor smiled warmly, extending her hand. "Judith mentioned you might want to talk. No pressure, of course." I hesitated. I'd never seen a therapist before. In my generation, we handled our problems privately. But standing there in my sister's kitchen, I realized how tired I was of handling things alone. "I think I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. 3 days later, I sat in Eleanor's comfortable office above her garage, sunlight streaming through stained glass wind chimes that cast rainbow patterns across the floor. "Tell me about the letter," Eleanor said after I'd shared the basics of my situation. "I wrote that I love my son and grandchildren, but I won't be disrespected anymore," I explained. I said I was stepping back until Rebecca could treat me with basic courtesy. Eleanor nodded. "And how do you feel about having set that boundary?" "Guilty," I admitted, "scared, but also relieved." "That's completely normal," she assured me. "Setting boundaries with family is one of the hardest things we do, especially for women of our generation who were taught to keep the peace at all costs." Over the next 2 weeks, I met with Eleanor every few days. We talked about my marriage to Frank, about raising David, about the gradual erosion of my sense of self as I'd tried to accommodate Rebecca's demands. "What do you want, Martha?" Eleanor asked during our 4th session. "Not what David wants. Not what's best for the grandchildren. What do you want?" The question stunned me. I realized no one had asked me that in years, perhaps not since Frank died. I had become so focused on maintaining my tenuous connection to David's family that I'd forgotten to consider my own needs. "I want to be treated with respect," I said, slowly. "I want to see my grandchildren without walking on eggshells. I want to remember who I am, besides just being a mother and grandmother." Eleanor smiled. "That's a wonderful starting point for our plan." My phone rang that evening as Judith and I were preparing dinner. David's name flashed on the screen. My hands trembled as I answered. "Where are you, Mom?" he demanded, skipping any greeting. "I came by your house, and you're not there." "I'm visiting Judith," I said calmly, following Eleanor's advice to maintain clear, unemotional boundaries. "You could have told me you were leaving town," he said, his voice tinged with annoyance. "And what's with sending the kids packages directly?" Rebecca was pretty upset about that. Of course she was. I had circumvented her control. "The quilts were gifts for Emma and Jason," I replied. "Did they like them?" David hesitated. "Yeah, they did. Emma put hers on her bed right away." His voice softened slightly. "Look, Mom, when are you coming home? This has gone on long enough." "I'm not sure yet," I said. "I'm taking some time for myself." Time for what? He sounded genuinely confused. If this is about Sunday... It's not just about Sunday, David. It's about years of being pushed aside and treated like an afterthought in your lives. That's not... fair, he protested. Isn't it? I asked quietly. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you stood up for me when Rebecca was being unkind? Silence stretched between us. I love you, David, I continued. That will never change, but I can't go back to the way things were. After we hung up, I sat on Judith's porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My conversation with David replayed in my mind. I had held firm, speaking my truth without anger or accusation, just as Eleanor had coached me. How did it go? Judith asked, joining me with 2 glasses of iced tea. Better than I expected, I admitted. I think he might actually be hearing me for the first time. Judith raised her glass in a small toast. To being heard. The next day, Eleanor helped me craft a plan for moving forward. We mapped out what healthy boundaries with David and Rebecca would look like, what specific behaviors I would no longer accept, and most importantly, how I would rebuild my life regardless of their response. You've spent years adapting to Rebecca's rules, Eleanor said. Now it's time to establish your own. That afternoon, I enrolled in a watercolor class at the community center near Judith's house, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. I joined Judith's book club. I volunteered at the local library, reading to children during story hour. With each small step, I felt pieces of myself returning, parts I had tucked away in my hurry to be the perfect mother, the accommodating mother-in-law, the always available grandmother. 3 weeks into my stay, an unexpected text arrived from Emma. Grandma, I love my quilt. When are you coming back? Mom says you're mad at us. My heart squeezed. Of course, Rebecca would frame my absence that way. After consulting with Eleanor, I called Emma directly, something I rarely did for fear of overstepping Rebecca's boundaries. I'm not mad at you, sweetheart, I assured her. I could never be mad at you or Jason. I just needed some time away to think about things. Are you and Mom fighting? She asked, her voice small. Your mom and I have some disagreements about how we treat each other, I said carefully, but that has nothing to do with how much I love you. Will you come to my recital next month? She asked. I have a solo. I hesitated, weighing Eleanor's advice about maintaining boundaries against my longing to see my granddaughter perform. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said finally. Just send me the details. After the call, I sat in Judith's garden, a strange peace settling over me. For the first time in years, I was making choices based on what felt right to me, not what would please Rebecca or keep the peace with David. So you're going back for the recital? Judith asked, joining me. Yes, I nodded. But on my terms this time. Judith smiled, squeezing my hand. I think Martha Wilson is finding her way back. That night, I wrote a new letter, not to Rebecca or David, but to myself. A promise to remember my worth, to honor my needs, to stand firm in the face of manipulation or disrespect. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it in my wallet. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebecca wouldn't surrender control without a fight. David might continue trying to push me back into my old role. But for the first time in years, I was prepared. I was no longer just David's mother or Emma and Jason's grandmother. I was Martha Wilson, complete and whole on my own terms. And that was a woman worth fighting for. Emma's recital was scheduled for a Friday evening in early November. I'd been at Judith's for nearly 6 weeks, the longest I'd been away from home in decades. As the date approached, my anxiety grew. I wasn't afraid of seeing Emma perform. I was afraid of facing Rebecca and David. Remember, you're going for Emma, Eleanor reminded me during our final session before I headed back. You don't need to engage with Rebecca if it doesn't feel safe. I nodded, clutching the small polished stone Eleanor had given me. A grounding object, she called it, something to hold when I needed to center myself. And you don't need to stay at your house if it feels too isolating, she added. Hotels exist for a reason. The drive back to Pennsylvania felt longer than when I'd left. The trees had lost most of their leaves and the sky hung low and gray, mirroring my mood. I'd arranged to stay at a small inn near my house rather than going home directly. I needed neutral territory to prepare myself. The night before the recital, I received a text from David. Mom, do you want us to pick you up tomorrow? A peace offering, perhaps, or a way to control when I arrived and left. Either way, I wasn't ready to be confined in a car with them. No, thank you, I replied. I'll meet you at the school. The auditorium was already half full when I arrived, 15 minutes early. I chose a seat in the middle, not hiding in the back, but not prominently placed in the front row either. I wore a deep blue dress I'd bought in Wilmington, a color Judith insisted brought out my eyes. Around my neck hung a silver pendant Frank had given me on our 30th anniversary. I wanted to carry pieces of my true self with me. I spotted them immediately, David scanning the crowd, Rebecca beside him in a crisp white blazer, her posture rigid. Jason slumped in his seat, absorbed in a handheld game. They hadn't seen me. Yet, taking a deep breath, I made my way over. Hello, I said simply. David's head jerked up. Mom! He stood awkwardly, leaning in for a brief hug. You look different. Thank you, I said, though I wasn't sure he meant it as a compliment. Rebecca's smile was tight. Martha, we weren't sure you'd actually come. I promised Emma, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I always keep my promises to my grandchildren. The implied criticism wasn't lost on Rebecca. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, Jason spotted me. Grandma, he exclaimed, abandoning his game to wrap his arms around my waist. I missed you. Did you bring cookies? I laughed, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. Not today, sweetheart, but I missed you too. You can sit with us, David offered, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. I hesitated only briefly. Thank you, I said, settling in next to my son. As we waited for the recital to begin, small talk filled the space between us. Careful, polite exchanges about the weather, about Jason's soccer team, about the upcoming holidays. Nothing of substance, nothing about my absence or the letter that had started it all. Rebecca barely spoke, her attention conspicuously focused on her program. David seemed relieved by the superficial conversation, as if my willingness to discuss the autumn foliage meant everything was back to normal, but it wasn't. I could feel the difference in myself, a quiet certainty, a lack of desperate need to please them. I was there for Emma, not to earn back my place in their lives. The lights dimmed and a hush fell over the audience. The children filed onto the stage in their formal attire, faces solemn with concentration. I spotted Emma immediately, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture perfect as she took her position with the other violinists. When her solo came, I held my breath. Her small fingers moved confidently across the strings, drawing out a melody so sweet and clear it brought tears to my eyes. Pride swelled in my chest. Despite everything, this beautiful, talented child was part of my legacy. After the performance, families gathered in the lobby for refreshments. Emma rushed toward us, her face flushed with excitement. Did you hear me, Grandma? Did you like it? You were magnificent, I told her, bending to embrace her. The best one on that stage. Rebecca stiffened beside me. Everyone did wonderfully, she corrected. I smiled, refusing to be baited. Yes, they did, but I'm allowed to think my granddaughter is especially talented. Emma beamed. Are you coming back to our house now? Dad made your favorite lasagna. I glanced at David, who nodded almost imperceptibly. An olive branch, unexpected, but not unwelcome. I'd like that, I said, surprising even myself. The drive to their house was quiet, my car following theirs through the familiar streets. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, reminding myself of Eleanor's advice. You can engage without surrendering. You can love them without accepting mistreatment. Their home looked exactly as I remembered, the tasteful exterior lighting, the seasonal wreath on the door, the immaculate foyer where we removed our shoes. But I entered differently this time, not as a visitor grateful for admission, but as a grandmother with inherent rights to be there. Over dinner, the conversation remained light, centered around the children. Emma chattered about her music, Jason about a science project. David kept things flowing, refilling drinks, offering seconds. Rebecca watched me with barely concealed wariness. When the children went upstairs to get ready for bed, the artificial calm evaporated. So, Rebecca said, setting her wine glass down with deliberate precision, are you done with your little vacation? It wasn't a vacation, Rebecca, I replied evenly. It was time I needed to think about our relationship. Our relationship, she repeated, her tone dismissive. You make it sound like we're dating. David shot her a warning look. Beck, please. No, it's all right, I said. Rebecca's entitled to her feelings, just as I'm entitled to mine. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. Not the letter I'd written to myself, but a new one I'd prepared with Eleanor's help. I've given this a lot of thought, I said, placing the envelope on the table. This explains how I'd like to move forward with our family. Rebecca made no move to take it. Another letter? Really, Martha? Yes, another letter, I confirmed. Because I want to be very clear about my boundaries. David reached for the envelope. What kind of boundaries? The kind that ensure I'm treated with respect, I said. The kind that allow me to have a relationship with my grandchildren without constant control and criticism. Rebecca's face flushed. You always make everything so dramatic. I'd like you to read it, I interrupted gently but firmly. Not now, but when you have time to consider it carefully. Carefully. It's not an ultimatum. It's an invitation to a healthier relationship. I stood up, gathering my purse. Thank you for dinner. Please tell the children I'll see them soon. You're leaving? David asked, surprise evident in his voice. I thought, maybe we'd work things out. We're just beginning to work things out. I corrected him. This is a process, David, not a quick fix. At the door, I turned back. Rebecca stood in the dining room doorway, arms crossed defensively. David looked lost, the unopened letter in his hand. I love you both, I said. But I love myself too. That's the difference now. As I drove back to the inn, a strange lightness filled my chest. I had faced them on my terms. I had delivered my truth without anger or apology. Whatever happened next, I had honored my own worth, and for tonight, that was enough. 3 days passed with no word from David or Rebecca. I returned to my home, finding it exactly as I'd left it. Tidy, quiet, filled with memories, but somehow smaller than I remembered. The weeks at Judith's had changed my perspective. I spent the first day reacquainting myself with my space, opening windows to chase away the staleness, putting fresh sheets on the bed. In the afternoon, I walked to the community center 6 blocks away and signed up for a twice-weekly watercolor class, determined to continue what I'd started in Wilmington. On the 4th day, my doorbell rang. David stood on my porch, hands jammed, in his pockets looking boyish and uncertain. Can I come in? He asked, his voice rough. I gestured him inside, noticing how he surveyed the living room with surprise, perhaps at the rearranged furniture or the half-finished painting on an easel by the window. You've been busy, he commented. I have, I agreed, offering him coffee, which he accepted with a grateful nod. We sat at my kitchen table, steam rising between us from our mugs. David seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his fingers tapping, an anxious rhythm. I read your letter, he finally said. Both of them, actually. I waited, giving him space to continue. I never realized. He started, then stopped, swallowing hard. I didn't see how I was treating you. I know you didn't, I said gently. Rebecca and I talked about it. A lot. He stared into his coffee. She doesn't see things the way I do. She thinks you're being unreasonable. That doesn't surprise me, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Rebecca and I have very different perspectives. David looked up, his eyes troubled. She doesn't want to change how things are. And you? I asked quietly. He hesitated. I don't want to lose you, Mom. Something in my chest loosened at those words. My son, my real son, was still in there, beneath the layers of marital compromise and learned indifference. You're not going to lose me, I assured him, but things do need to change. I don't know how to make that happen without causing problems with Rebecca, he admitted, the conflict plain on his face. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. You don't have to fix everything at once, David. Just start by seeing me, really seeing me. He nodded slowly. I'd like to try. After he left, I called Judith, relaying our conversation with a mixture of hope and caution. It's a start, she agreed. But remember what Eleanor said. Trust has to be rebuilt. Through actions, not just words. The next week brought small changes. David called twice, just to check in. He invited me to Jason's soccer game, carefully mentioning that Rebecca would be busy with a charity event that day. I accepted, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. The soccer field was windy, and I sat on the cold bleachers wrapped in a scarf, cheering as Jason's team scored. David brought me hot chocolate at halftime, settling beside me with an ease I hadn't felt in years. Thanks for coming, he said. Jason was excited when I told him you'd be here. I've missed them, I admitted. I've missed you too. He looked at me then, really looked at me perhaps for the first time in years. I've missed you too, Mom, more than I realized. After the game, David suggested ice cream, just the three of us. As Jason chattered about his team, I caught David watching me with thoughtful eyes. Something was shifting, slowly but perceptibly. Thanksgiving approached, traditionally spent at David and Rebecca's. This year, no invitation came, and I didn't expect one. Instead, I accepted Judith's offer to join her and a few friends for dinner. 2 days before I was set to leave for Judith's, Emma called. "Grandma?" Her voice was hushed, almost secretive. "Are you coming for Thanksgiving?" "Not this year, sweetheart," I said carefully. "I'm going to visit Aunt Judith." "But you always come to our house," she protested. "Sometimes traditions change," I explained. "But that doesn't mean I love you any less." "Mom says you're choosing your sister over us," Emma said, her voice small. My heart clenched. "That's not true. I'm just taking care of myself right now, which is something adults sometimes need to do." After we hung up, I sat in my sewing room, fighting back tears. Rebecca was still manipulating the narrative, using the children to pressure me. But unlike before, I recognized the tactic for what it was. The following day, a text from David. "The kids are upset you won't be here for Thanksgiving." I responded simply, "I'm sorry they're upset. I've already made plans with Judith this year. No pleading, no lengthy explanations, no guilt, just the truth," calmly stated. His reply surprised me. "I understand. Maybe we can do something with just you and the kids when you get back?" Progress, small but significant. Thanksgiving at Judith's was a revelation, relaxed, joyful, free from tension. Her friends welcomed me warmly, and for the first time in years, I enjoyed a holiday meal without watching my every word and action. "You seem different," Judith observed as we washed dishes after everyone left. "Lighter. I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've set down a weight I didn't even know I was carrying." December arrived with crisp air and holiday decorations. I decorated my small home with care, placing the ornaments Frank and I had collected throughout our marriage on a modest tree. In previous years, I would have waited for an invitation to David and Rebecca's to celebrate Christmas, making do with token decorations at my own house. Not this year. This year, I created my own holiday spirit. A week before Christmas, David called. "Mom, we'd like you to come for Christmas Eve dinner," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Will Rebecca be comfortable with that?" I asked directly. A pause. "She's making an effort. For the kids. And for me. I considered this. Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to come." "Really?" The relief in his voice was palpable. "Yes, really," I confirmed. "But David?" "I'll be coming as myself this time. Not as who anyone else wants me to be." "I wouldn't want it any other way," he said. And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. That night, I sat by my Christmas tree, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey of the past few months. The woman who had stood frozen in humiliation, as Rebecca screamed at her, seemed like a stranger now, someone I had once been but had outgrown. The transformation wasn't complete. There would be difficult moments ahead, boundaries tested, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. Rebecca might never truly accept the new dynamic, but I was no longer defined by her acceptance. I was Martha Wilson, mother, grandmother, artist, friend, sister, complete in myself, whether anyone else recognized it or not, and that was the greatest gift of all. Christmas Eve arrived with a light dusting of snow, just enough to make the world look magical. I dressed with care in a deep green sweater and my good pearls, wrapping the presents I'd chosen for the children, art supplies for Emma, who had shown interest in my painting, and a model rocket kit for Jason, who loved anything that could sigh. Fly for David and Rebecca, I'd selected a gift certificate to their favorite restaurant. Thoughtful, but impersonal, a reflection of where our relationship stood. I arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, neither early nor late. David answered the door, his smile genuine. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, embracing me warmly. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, the tree glittering in the corner of the living room. Emma and Jason rushed to greet me, their excitement unmarred by the complexities of adult relationships. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile was restrained but not hostile. "Martha," she nodded. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me," I replied, matching her polite tone. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Rebecca had prepared a traditional ham and everyone complimented. My cranberry relish, a recipe Frank's mother had passed down. The conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected, focusing mainly on the children and safe topics like upcoming movies and local news. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for dessert, Emma suddenly asked, "Grandma, why were you gone so long?" A brief silence fell over the room. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, while David watched me with cautious eyes. I set my coffee cup down, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes adults need time to think about what's important to them. I needed to remember who I am besides being a grandmother and mother. But you're still our grandma, right? Jason asked, concern crossing his young face. Always, I assured him. That will never change. Rebecca cleared her throat. Why don't you kids get the cookies from the kitchen? Once they were gone, she turned to me. I want to be clear about something, Martha. I'm trying here for David and the children, but I haven't forgotten what happened. Neither have I replied calmly. And I'm not asking you to forget. I'm only asking for mutual respect going forward. She studied me, perhaps seeing for the first time that I wasn't the same woman who had left their house in tears months ago. I can work with respect, she said. Finally, it wasn't warmth or acceptance, but it was a beginning. After presents were opened and the children sent to bed, David walked me to my car. That went better than I expected, he admitted, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Yes, it did, I agreed. Will you come for New Year's Day? Just lunch, nothing fancy. I considered this. I'd like that. But David, I want you to understand something. He looked at me expectantly. I'm happy to rebuild our relationship, but I won't go back to how things were. I won't diminish myself to keep the peace. He nodded slowly. I know, Mom, and I don't want you to. I like this version of you. You seem stronger. I am stronger, I affirmed, and happier too. As January turned to February, a new pattern emerged. I saw the children regularly, sometimes with David, occasionally even with Rebecca present. We weren't the picture-perfect family from Hallmark movies, but we were finding our way toward something healthier. I continued my watercolor classes, joined a book club, and even started volunteering at the local library. My life expanded beyond the narrow focus of David's family that had consumed me for so long. On a crisp March morning, nearly 6 months after Rebecca had thrown my drink and demanded I leave their lives, my doorbell rang. To my surprise, she stood on my porch alone, her expression unreadable. May I come in? She asked. I invited her inside, offering tea, which she accepted with a nod. We sat in my living room, surrounded by my paintings and books, the evidence of my reclaimed life. David doesn't know I'm here, she said abruptly. I wanted to talk to you directly. I waited, feeling oddly calm. I've been seeing a therapist, she continued, surprising me. David insisted after everything. I didn't want to go, but he said it was important to him. I see, I said neutrally. She suggested I might have some control issues. Rebecca's mouth twisted slightly, especially regarding family boundaries. This was unexpected territory. I sipped my tea, giving her space to continue. I'm not good at this, she admitted, acknowledging when I've been difficult. Few people are, I offered. She met my eyes directly. I don't like that you stood up to me. It's easier when people just go along with what I want. The honesty was startling. I imagine it is, I agreed. But, she continued, I respect that you didn't back down. And I see how it's changed things. With David, with the kids. They seem to appreciate you more now that you're not always available. I nodded, recognizing the painful truth she was acknowledging. When we value ourselves, others often follow suit. My therapist says something similar, she admitted grudgingly. We weren't friends and might never be, but in that moment, a different kind of understanding passed between us, woman to woman, both flawed, both trying to protect what we loved. I won't pretend we're going to be best friends, Rebecca said, standing to leave. But I think we can find a way to coexist that doesn't involve shouting or silent treatment. I'd like that, I said sincerely. As spring bloomed, so did my life. I hosted a small Easter brunch at my house, my first time entertaining the whole family since the incident. David helped me prepare, arriving early to move furniture and set up an egg hunt in my modest backyard. You seem happy, Mom, he observed as we arranged daffodils in a vase. I am, I confirmed. Not because everything is perfect, but because I'm at peace with myself. When Rebecca and the children arrived, there was still an underlying tension. But it was manageable, contained by our mutual commitment to civility. We had found a delicate balance, not the closeness I'd once desperately craved, but a measured, respectful relationship I could live with proudly. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on my porch watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from Judith. How did it go? Better than I could have imagined a year ago, I replied truthfully. As the sky turned from gold to deep purple, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the humiliation that sparked my transformation, the letter that changed everything, the painful but necessary separation, the careful rebuilding. I had lost something. The fantasy of a perfect family, the illusion that sacrifice would guarantee love. But I had gained something far more valuable: myself. At 70, I had finally learned that love without respect isn't love at all, that boundaries aren't selfish, but essential, that sometimes the greatest act of love is standing firm in your own truth. The path ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Rebecca would have her moments, old patterns would threaten to resurface, new challenges would arise. But I was no longer afraid. I was Martha Wilson, complete, worthy, and finally, truly free. And that was a testament worth writing.